Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's awesome special episode of the Fantasy Fiends Podcast, the Roundtable Battle of the Assassins. Today, we've got some awesome authors here joining us to talk about not only their assassins, but all great assassins in fantasy fiction and fiction in general. So let's go around and say hello. Michael, why don't you start us off?
Hello, I'm Michael J. Sullivan. You may have read a book of mine, I hope.
Most definitely. Jeremy.
Hello, my name's Jeremy. I write under JT Williams. If you're an indie fantasy addicts group, you've seen me going back and forth with Andy because Taviska's the best and I've got to prove it. But hi.
Very good. DW.
I'm DW Hawkins, author of The Seven Signs. I was in the Defiant Guardians box set with Andy and Steve. Hello.
Awesome. Lindsay.
Hey, I'm Lindsay Buroker. I read a lot of stuff, fantasy and science fiction, but my first series was The Emperor's Edge, and it had a assassin as one of these stars of the series. So ready to chat them up.
Very cool. And Stevie, the strangely nude Stevie.
Strangely, it's not strange. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Stevie Collier. I'm the author of the Dark Assassin series. He has purple hair, and he's usually halfly nude, so I'm actually dressed up as him in honor of Halloween. So it's great to be here with a bunch of people who like to kill people.
Very good. All right. So, you know, the number one question that I like to ask people when we're talking about assassins is what is the most valuable ability, trait, skill for an assassin to have, whether it's skill at arms, creativity, ingenuity, cunning, ruthlessness. So what do you guys think is the number one most important thing?
I would go with sarcasm.
Good one.
I think you have to be a little sociopath type, some borderline to not care that you're killing people, or even if it's only for a noble cause, as some fantasy assassins are. It's not quite normal human behavior, so I try to make my character a little atypical in that way.
I guess I could go next. In my opinion, the reason why my assassin's not a very good assassin is because I believe that all assassins should have no emotion when they're on the job, and my assassin was very emotional. So that's what I would say, perhaps emotionless whenever on the mission. Doesn't let emotion get in the way.
I'm going to go with cunning. I think, just the ability to get out of any situation that might arise.
Interesting.
Nice.
I'll go with creativity.
That's what I was going to say.
Well, you learn from the best, I guess, right? No, creativity, because it's great if you have everything you need. You've got daggers, weapons, whatever you're planning to use to kill someone or cause them to die. It's quite a different situation when you get put in a scenario where you don't have all that and you can still carry out your mission. So, and you have to have creativity to be able to do that.
Or even finding a way, like, let's say your target's posted up in the bank vault, for example, and there's no way you can get at them. They've got layers of steel. There's tons of guards around them. So how are you going to get to them? You got to be a bit more creative and find a way to lure them out. Whether you set off an alarm that makes think the bank's on fire and they're running out, or whatever it is. You get creative. Creativity, I feel, can make up for a lack of weapons expertise or ruthlessness in many situations.
Yeah, plans rarely go exactly like you want them to, and the ability to immediately switch your focus and carry out what you need to carry out is important.
Very good. Michael, I want to hear more about this sarcasm ability.
Just going on, actually, it sort of links up with what Lindsay was saying. If you have a character who goes around killing people for a living, and you want to make him someone who's going to be a character that people want to read about, you got to have something that makes him humanizing. And I think most people appreciate a good sarcasm, particularly when you're talking about someone who's murdering people. I mean, you got Daredevil, who's not exactly an assassin necessarily. I think he did start out as one, didn't he? But at least when you can relate through humor, then you can kind of accept someone who goes around murdering people for a living if they make you laugh. I mean, come on, this is like, if you're dating women, it's the same thing. If you can make them laugh, you're going to get halfway to somewhere.
I'll agree with that.
You mean Deadpool, right, Michael? Okay, yeah. No, I was thinking about that they say, humor sort of hides the pain. That's one of the traits of Deadpool, is that all of these quips that he does, it sort of gives, like, it's used as a shield to hide the true pain within him. And I think that's one thing that would actually really make an assassin character really interesting, is that, you know, they use the sarcasm as the shield or to drive people away, but it's sort of hiding the pain that they're dealing with.
So we would say it's creating sympathy for the reader or the viewer or the character.
Or at least some kind of link that you can connect with them on, because otherwise, I mean, most people here, I'm thinking, maybe I'm wrong, but most people here probably are not like, hey, I would really like to hang out with a cold-blooded killer, you know, particularly for several hours a day. Probably not, but, you know, if they're a little bit more humorous, then yeah.
Is anyone else here jealous of Michael's workspace?
Yes.
I really wish we could switch places, Michael.
Hey, I don't have a tiger on my wall.
That's true. That's true. I forgot about the damn tiger.
And no one's questioning why my walls are white.
Are you in an insane asylum?
No, he's dead. He's in heaven.
Oh, he's in heaven. Okay.
I'm dead. Yeah. Sorry. At least I showed up.
Yep.
Now here's a fun one. Poison. You know, you always hear about poison as being the woman's weapon in, you know, in historical context, or the coward's. What are your thoughts on poison as an assassination tool?
It's what I would use. But my character is very, I would say, almost kind of that Eastern philosophy, very dedicated to the weapons craft and stuff. So he would consider it not enough of a challenge. He's always sort of like, I'm going to do this, but I want to do it because I'm best. So he's not really, he sticks with the swords and just killing people as efficiently as possible. But yep, he doesn't play around with the poison. And I would have a villain do it. I feel like it's kind of people, when your character's the hero, they expect him to have like a code of honor sort of thing, even if he's an assassin, and you're going to lose points for the reader if you care with this particular character. If you're doing something that's maybe not as honorable as like walking up and facing them in noble battle.
I always thought it was poison.
That's true. That's interesting.
Precise weapon too. You know, I mean, it's so easy to mean to poison one person and poison another or a group of people. And going into it, you would probably have to know a little something about chemistry, you know, in order to write it in a believable way. At least, you know, that's the way I feel about it. So I usually just don't even think about poison.
In one of my books, actually the one with Saviska in it, when he's still in the assassin role, they don't allow weapons in the city, and poison's the only way he's able to kill anyone. But it's not that his order, the body that controls and directs him, they want to kill everybody in the city at once. The only way to do that is poison, by using the one substance that's supposed to protect them. Because in my world, all creatures of magic, be it elves, dwarves, anyone that uses magic is essentially the bad guy from his point of view. And the only way to kill all of them at once is to use this poison. It's, in that particular case, it works pretty good. I agree, though, with historical account, it's a woman's weapon. But in this particular case, it's a lot easier to kill a bunch of people with poison than it is to stab them all.
It's interesting. A scene that I wrote, or for some reason, I don't know if I got it from a movie or TV show, or it just popped into my head, is where poisoners, they see their creations sort of as an art, or like a mix of art and science. You know, like a painter, he blends colors to create a very specific, you know, color palette for whatever he's painting. An alchemist or a poisoner, they've got to mix each aspect of their poisons very carefully, you know, like you see it in modern chemistry or science, you know, where they're dropping like a grain of something into things, you know, in microscopic degrees. And so it was kind of an interesting thought that, you know, poison is traditionally seen as this way, but in many ways it takes even more precision and intelligence and, I guess, education than, you know, picking up a steel sword and smacking at people with it, because you really have to know all of these combinations and, you know, find a way that there's no way to counteract the poison or to detect the poison or things like that.
For me, the poison question, my assassin is not a very good assassin. He's naive and kind-hearted, so like the complete opposite. So he would never use poison. He would feel, you know, if he's going to kill someone, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be a challenge. And he's going to give the other person a chance to actually fight back. and that's why he's a terrible assassin. And by the end of the series, he's not really an assassin anymore.
Did you base him off The Hunter?
Actually, so he's actually based off of Brent Weeks, a book that I wasn't even able to finish. And I was reading halfway through. I was like, I can do this. So it was actually based off him, and he is an assassin, right? The main character in he's an assassin.
Kylar Stern, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I didn't get that.
It's funny. Stevie wrote about the Kylar Stern character. I wrote about the Durzo Blint character. All right. So now pivoting a little bit from the reader side of things to the writer side of things, what made you go with assassins? Why did you write an assassin character when there's so many other professions, more noble and honorable professions to choose from? Michael, I think you're the one who we all know and love. So why don't you tell us why you chose Royce?
Well, he was mostly chosen as a counterpoint to Hadrian. I was looking for one good, one bad, and you can't get much worse than an assassin. They really never were intended to be necessarily assassins. I kind of pictured them originally as sort of like I don't know, James Bond of the medieval period. They take jobs. They take whatever jobs. They can be doing infiltration, spying, stealing, killing, anything you want. But to make them come together the first time to be sort of a good pairing, we have the evil side of the assassin, and we have the kind of the good knight. And you put those two together, and you have a pretty dynamic, well-balanced team. But it just seemed like a no-brainer, because if I wanted to take it really dark on that one side and make that one character so really kind of cruel and balance that end, that's the best way to do it.
So sort of a chicken and egg question. Who came first, Royce or Hadrian, in your mind?
No, they actually came about almost at the same time. They kind of paired up from the very beginning. I mean, my wife told me this later on, and I didn't realize until I went back and looked at it, but it's kind of true that, I mean, during my youth, we had Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and a television show called I Spy. And if you look at either one of those now, I'm like, oh my God, those are my characters. So I just kind of had them in the back of my mind, apparently, without even realizing it. The characters don't line up properly, but it's the same kind of banter, the same two guys, kind of different talents. But no, they didn't come out one at a time. They were kind of like one big pair.
Very cool. And now, because Royce is it a Duster is the name?
Yeah, that's his assassin guild, or his thieves guild name.
And so, but what's the name of the like the profession? Is it, or was it a bucket man or something? There was a very specific bucket man. And so they're not specifically assassins. They're jack of all trades, but for the guild.
Well, no, there was a guild, and in the guild, everyone has different professions. There are some people who are pilferers, some people are con men, so when people are second story people, masterminds, that kind of thing. And in that group, there were three main assassins, and Royce was one of them. He was a bucket man, the idea that you kick the bucket kind of thing. So he was one bucket man. Then there was Merrick, who becomes his arch enemy, who was also an assassin. Then there's a girl named Jade, who is the other assassin who was romantically connected with Merrick. So, and then of course, if you've seen the story, you would know that Jade gets killed by Royce, which puts Merrick and Royce at odds, and that's kind of a problem. But those are the only three assassins in that group. When they leave and they go become part of Rhaenyra, which is what he does after he leaves the guild, at that point they just start making a living, doing whatever they can, usually, nefarious means.
Gotcha. But originally Royce was created as an assassin.
Well, he was originally he's born on the streets. He's trying to get by. He's stealing, pickpocketing. Then he worked his way up to, bigger heists. And then finally he got so good at it because, of course, he has certain natural abilities that most people don't have. And that gave him the ability to become a very good assassin, which is where he topped off at.
Very cool. All right, Lindsay, tell us about Sicarius. Was that name chosen because of like Sicario? Was that like a purposeful thing or just accidental?
Well, this was my first series, and I thought it was really cool to just go through the Latin English dictionary and pick names, and it literally means assassin in Latin. And so it's a little on the nose there. So that is where that name came from. And so anything else based off that same root, it's from the same root. And he was, I actually, speaking of childhood shows that influenced, I had this kind of A-Team thing in mind. I grew up in the 80s, and that was a big show that I watched back then. So he was a bit like Hannibal, a harder Hannibal. And he starts out as the antagonist in the first book. He's not a good guy. He's not on the main character's side. She's actually supposed to kill him as an assignment from her employers. So I didn't have to worry too much about making him warm and fuzzy. And he's very much not and it's very interesting to me what a fan favorite he's been. He is more like fan art than any other series or any other character I have from the readers, and he does kind of grow and change over the series, but I think that people like that he never really became a heart of gold kind of guy. He's very logical and doesn't quite get humans fully, so that's why it's very easy for him to treat them logically and dismiss people if necessary. So, and like I said, he's human. He's just kind of, I would say maybe on the autism spectrum a little bit, or a sociopath, to be honest. So he can be loyal to his friends, which is what makes him somewhat redeeming once he decides people are useful to have around. So, but yeah, he's definitely not just a normal guy. And I enjoyed writing him. I found him easier to write than I should admit. But yeah, so I enjoyed that. Maybe kind of like Michael, he's more of I wouldn't say evil. He's just really logical and efficient. And if he has orders to do something, that's what he does. Versus the heroine, who is very good-hearted and wants to do the right thing. And so it made for a good straight man, funny man kind of dynamic throughout the series.
Interesting. So his approach to assassination is if he can logically rationalize it to himself, then he's willing to do it, essentially.
He started out as the Emperor's raised from birth kind of to be a killer. So at the point when the series starts, he's just taking orders from his boss. And then as it goes on, it is a logical thing. Well, this further me, he has one goal. I don't want to spoil the series, but there's one thing he cares about that he's trying to achieve. So if it's logical and or if somebody's just trying to kill him, he's very not going to let an enemy live. Because I always hated that in fantasy. It's like, I loved Firefly, that scene where Mal just kicks the guy into the thruster. He's like, oh, screw you, you're dead. I don't want you coming back to bother me. Because I always hate it when there's a 10-book series and the bad guy keeps coming back. It's like, just kill him.
Yeah. So
there's that.
It's always interesting to explore sort of the origin of the assassins. Like Michael, going back to Royce, he started out as a on the streets, like one of the outcasts, and sort of clawed and scraped his way into the guild, and then just continued to go and do more out of survival, right?
Yeah, he was a complete orphan, so he had nothing, and he kind of got taken under the wing of his friend Merrick, who was a certified genius, and taught him how to read and how to write and all that stuff. And then he worked him up to where he was becoming an officer in the guild. Then he had his falling out, and he ended up going to war with the guild and killing a number of top people in the guild and in the city. And then that ended that war, and he left. And they kind of had a mutual pact where he doesn't come into their city anymore, and they don't bother him. And it's kind of been left at that. But of course, people don't always uphold the rules, so you get problems.
Gotcha. So that need for survival. I mean, as an orphan on the streets, you kind of got to do what you got to do. DW, why don't you tell us about your assassin?
Well, for me, in my world, it all kind of revolves around magic. The people in my city who use magic are really overpowered. So when one goes rogue, and just kind of starts doing what they want, there aren't really any non-magical authorities that can keep them in check. So the assassins in my world are mages that also fight other mages, and it was really just a way to have cool magical battles take place. And I really hated the way that wizards and stories are sort of characterized as these dudes in robes, and what I mean. I always really liked the Jedi idea a little more. That they were more like like badass fighters and maybe spies, and they also have cool powers. That's really where I come from. But for me, the interesting part of it is the intersections in the setting, the different political systems that are in play, and the reasons that they exist and where they come from. And for me, it's a principled thing. My assassins anyway are motivated to kill these other magic users because nobody else can help them.
So they're almost like the Watchmen mixed with like a policing force, essentially.
In a way, yeah. But in the story, the guy who trained them all, it turns out that he was, kind of training them all to become his own personal bodyguard. So the whole organization symbols, and they become outlaws anyway. So
interesting. And what drives your main character? Like, what's his reason for doing it? Is it is he actually trying to keep law and order?
Well, for them, it's they have a few laws of magic in my world that they they come from an organization that's trained to do this. So it's what they're, I guess you would call it a guild, essentially, is trained to do. So,
very interesting.
It's not, they're not getting paid or anything like that. It's they get sent out on missions. They're more like a little bit more like special ops soldiers than just paid assassins like the traditional model.
Very interesting. Jeremy, tell us about your semi-competent assassin.
Semi-competent, but still better than the hunter, of course. Stab. So if we want to talk about like from a writer standpoint, when I first created my entire world, I literally wrote an assassin kills a vampire. That was the first bit of everything I've written. And there was really no history. I had to kind of develop everything as I began to write that book. And ironically, my first book was actually the latest or the furthest in the timeline. So if you pick up Rogues of Magic, you're actually reading the last of the books that I have written currently. People who follow me have read my other stuff know I use assassins in a few different ways. Saviska, his cult of assassins, they're very different because they're not a guild. They don't typically work together at all, and they're kept away from each other because there's kind of a secret that they don't even know, which he learns in the book. Other assassins start figuring things out, but it's because the Grand Protectorate, which is essentially kind of like a pseudo-Roman empire, they use these particular males and females because they're of a race that is kind of like what was mentioned before, Jedi-esque. They have powers, but they don't know it. It's kind of like having the Force, but having no idea what, you can actually use it or that it's even something. They're taken as children. All of them are orphans because of the Grand Protectorate, and they're used essentially to root out any stragglers of magic. So though Saviska doesn't do this, at least in what's written so far, they're used to hunt down, say, the rogue elven warriors, dwarven warriors, the ones that literally beat the crap out of everybody that they face. The Grand Protectorate based everything they learned about them off of two other very particular sects. One is the Shadow Elves of the East, which there is a group of them called the Assassins of Eklo, which are essentially the first rebellions against just kind of like mindless killing. My Shadowlands are literally the darkest place in the sense of both physically they're dark, but also blood sacrifice, cannibalism. That's normal there. Assassinations is just kind of like part of their game. The other side of this would be my elves, and particularly the Leaves of Salmark. And essentially these are elvish assassins. They can use technology to, instead of running down a hallway, they can be in one place, shift to another, and kill you. The Grand Protectorate was trying to copy all this. The problem is they didn't know how. They destroyed all the cultures that could teach them how to actually do this. So Saviska is essentially an assassin that actually knows how to assassinate. He's not using magic. He's not using abilities. He's just good at what he does. That's the easiest way to put that.
Interesting. Now, why did you choose to write about an assassin? What made you go that route?
I knew I needed him to be an individual that was supposed to be dark, that was supposed to be heartless. And that was being an orphan, no family. He was literally pushed into this life. And I think we've talked about this in the group, how it's the difference between him and the hunter. He didn't necessarily have a choice. He didn't know he had a choice either. I like that because it was a good way to show a dynamic between my other big character, Brethor, who is literally kind of like the king of the city that Saviska gets sent to. He's very nonchalant. He literally is the guardian of all the people of magic. And when he eventually, minor spoiler, when he eventually figures out who Saviska is and what his purpose is, he's kind of like, meh, you could have tried. You could have tried to kill me. That would have not worked. But it's just a complete contrast between, yes, you have to kill people, and no, that's fine. You can try to kill me. With Saviska, he was meant to be a darker character by creation. Not me creating him, but as he was created as an assassin, he was supposed to be cold and heartless. But what he starts figuring out, that there must be something more to the world than just killing everybody that your government body basically tells you to.
Interesting. All right, Stevie, what made you decide to go with an assassin?
So I like I said, I read Brent Weeks's book, and then I was like, you know what, I can do this. But what really made it like, you know, I have to write about an assassin is because I did martial arts for 12 years, starting when I was 10 years old. And I've done martial arts all over the world, and I knew all this training. I've been through really unorthodox stuff. And I was like, you know what, I could write about this, something that's really interesting to me. But what's weird is I'm 100% a pantser. So I never know what's going to happen. Every day is like me reading a book. You know, I never know. And I'm one of those people that, you know, I can't control my characters sometimes. They just do, like, I just have a new love interest in my book, and it's killing me because now it's added like 20,000 words to the books. I have to fix it now. It wasn't my fault. So he actually became an assassin on his own. But the thing is, like I said, he's not a very good assassin. He's emotional. He doesn't listen. He's not the most creative. He's also extremely big. He's tall. He breaks all the stereotypes of the smaller assassin who can get into like nooks and crannies. No, not him. He's like 6'5" and like pure muscle. What makes him extremely dangerous is an alien parasite that comes to the planet and takes him as his host. Well, his master takes him through this thing called the sleep trials, which are used to bring out magic in people. Well, they find out Esh, who is the assassin, doesn't have any magic powers, even though both his mom and dad were able to manipulate magic. And so he doesn't have magic, but the sleep trials do allow him to control this parasite that I've called the Wisp. And strangely enough, it's exactly like Venom, except I didn't think of Venom one time while writing the book, which proves that all stories have been written. It's just our twist on them. And so it's exactly like Venom, except even down to the hilarious conversations between the two. If you've seen the movie, I won't give anything away. But that's the reason why I wrote an assassin, because honestly, it was super easy for me to write because I was like Andy. Andy's had martial arts training, and I know he can say that once you've had martial arts training, it makes writing the training scenes a lot, not only more enjoyable, but easier. And there's a lot of stuff that you train in martial arts that a lot of people don't realize, from knuckle push-ups to having medicine balls dropped onto your stomach. I mean, there's tons of stuff. Walking on coals to reduce fear. I've never done that. But just crazy stuff that I was able to implement in the books, which is why another big thing why I was actually halfway through with the book when I met Andy, and I read which at the time was Blade of the Destroyer, fell in love with it, emailed him, and then I was like, you know what, I'm going to turn this into a trilogy. And it was through the help of Andy, Brandon Barr, Jonathan Yanez that my book was actually able to be successful, and I was able to become a full-time writer. So Andy, in public, thank you so much. But yeah, that's my reasoning for writing an assassin. It's not a good answer because I am, like I said, 100% a pantser.
I started writing assassins since reading fiction with Brent Weeks, reading about Royce, Michael, reading pretty much every single darker fantasy book that was available 20 years ago, let's say, which was far fewer than you'd expect or than what's available now. I was so intrigued by the darker side of life, not just the knights and the kings and all of that, but then also like the Thieves Guild, a concept that was introduced in Dickensian literature, or assassins guilds or cults or things like that. So when I was writing it, I was like, all right, now what kind of character do I want to write? And the character of Durzo Blint from Brent Weeks' story was the one that really got me. I was like, I wanted to know more about this guy, but the story was so focused on the younger protagonist that I didn't get as much of him as I wanted. And I liked the fact that he was sort of an older protagonist, sort of his mid 40s, in the height of his power, none of the young adult issues or, lack of self-confidence or things like that, going through the training. I didn't want to deal with all of that. So I was like, all right, I'm going to write someone who's sort of in the peak of their power. And so the character of the hunter was born. And as I was researching the psychology of assassins, I found this paper published by the Secret Service that actually broke down sort of the 8 basic motivations for people to become assassins and hitmen in the last century or so, and what sort of things drive them. And as I was researching that, I was led towards sort of the darker aspects of the human psyche and the psychology. And I watched an episode of Criminal Minds where the character, the villain of the week, he kills people because the voice of his father in his head is giving him crap. And so the father's voice only falls silent when he kills. And I was like, that's a perfect motivation right there. He's got this dagger that's driving him to kill. So he kills to shut up the dagger. But then because it's the only thing that he knows, he sort of misses it. And so it's this weird struggle literally with his own inner demons. And that's how this character came about. And then, of course, the fact that he was half demon led to amazing, adventures and epic sword fights and things like that.
I'm totally fanboying right now.
But ultimately, it came down to that battle where this character was fighting against his own inner demons and struggling against the darker urges that, to a certain extent, every human on Earth has. By wrestling with those, it made for a much more a story that really everyone could identify with, because to some extent, we've all got something that we're dealing with. And so as I wrote the story, and he was already fully drawn into this pattern of killing to silence the voice, and then hating the silence, and then welcoming the voice, and then eventually it gets so bad that he has to kill again, and it's sort of this endless cycle. But when I wrote his sort of backstory, is he wakes up with no memory of who he is or where he is, and he just sees two people fighting, someone assaulting an old dude, and this dagger that he's carrying with him tells him kill him. So he kills the guy who's assaulting the old guy, and so he's like, "Oh, I'm good at this." It came easy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you didn't show his training? Do you know in your head why he became so good, or is that still unknown to you?
Well, he's super old. He's functionally immortal.
Yeah, but so he doesn't remember how he got good, though, right?
No, and it's not necessary.
It's not. But do you know? I'm just curious.
Well, he's been alive for 5,000 plus years.
Okay.
So he's been a conqueror. He's been a king. He's been a prisoner. He's been everything. So
He can also bake a really good cake.
You know what? He's not a very good cook, actually.
After 5,000 years, he's never cooked his own food. I mean, my God.
Well, he gets his brain wiped every 100 years or so. So all he's got is muscle memory.
That's really inconvenient.
It really is.
Oh, man.
But that's what makes the character of the hunter really, it's Tick. It's this struggle with himself, and all he's ever known in his memory is violence, and he's good at it. So he's sort of leaned into it, and it's given him this peace from the voice, and then it comes back, and it's just this struggle. And so that's what really drew me to the character a lot.
Andy, can I ask a quick writer's question for everybody?
Yeah.
Is everyone here an outliner? Do they know where the story's going at all times?
Depends on when you ask me.
Okay.
When I first wrote Saviska, no, I had no idea. I literally pantsed Winemaker of the North completely. That's great.
I knew that about you.
Then we talked about it in the previous
so.
episode, which I think is great, especially if you're starting off a new world. I think a lot of people, in my opinion, get bogged down with world building. They'll spend so much time. It's like, you got this great detail, but does it still have the same heart? For me, I just kind of started writing, which is great until you get to book 2, and you're introducing other characters and other worlds, and you got to explain why and who and how, and it can be difficult. Now I do kind of like a bullet point. I know where I'm going. I typically I knew my ending. I knew my ending for Winemaker of the North, and of course it changed, but that's normally how I start. I figure out my ending, figure out a few key scenes I want to see my characters do, and kind of just start going with it, see where it goes. So I guess I'm in between. I like Chris Fox's method that he outlines out, and on his YouTube videos. I can't implement it. I've attempted to, I've tried, and so the only thing I do try to do is I'll knock out my chapter headings, and I'll put a short paragraph on kind of what happens there.
Andy, I think you kind of do the same thing, don't you?
I do a little bit more for some scenes. Basically, I just sort of get the flavor of each scene, the general feeling, and then I'll try to come up with the hook for the end of the chapter, so I know where the next chapter is going, and that just a rough outline, so it keeps me on track. But then, of course, the story tends to take on a life of its own, and you meander, and you give the characters room to expand and to identify with each other and breathe a bit, essentially. So
true. I didn't mean to take over the show. We can move on if we want.
Totally fine. Michael, what about you? Pantser or plotter?
I started out as a discovery writer. I don't think that pantsers like to be called pantsers. Isn't that considered derogatory these days?
I like derogatory.
but I started off as Discovery, and then as I started to try to make money doing this, I realized I was wasting way too much time in rewriting. So because you'd end up always getting to a locked room or someplace where you can't go anymore, and you realize, oh, I'll just fix this by rewriting half of the novel, which took me 3 or 4 months to write to begin with. So that became a problem. So I discovered that if I thought out the book in my head a little bit more, I had less rewriting, and then that led me to writing some stuff down. And then eventually I started doing bullet points, like, I forget your name. It's never there when you're, okay, JT, right? But what is,
Jeremy.
Is it a secret?
No, it's okay. It's fine.
What's the T, Jeremy?
Okay.
Tom.
So the other thing was that as I got further and further along, then I started actually writing more of it down, so then I would get a little bit more like, but I think it's a sliding scale. It's like if you want to have a good ending that satisfies the promise of the beginning of your book, you're going to want more outline. But if you do more outlining, then you end up getting in a situation where you contrive your characters, where they are forced to do things that they wouldn't normally do. So, like I said, you have to slide this back and forth oftentimes per writing of whatever book you're writing. So you have to make sure that you get it so that the characters don't seem like you're forcing them to do it. So you kind of have to let them do what they want, which kind of ruins a good outline occasionally, but you have to rework it. But if you don't have at least some degree of an outline, then you'll have what I have a tendency to think of as the Stephen King syndrome, where he's a great writer. He builds such great suspense and such anticipation, but the endings never usually satisfy except on like 3 or 4 occasions. So I always felt that was bad. I also call it kind of the lost syndrome, where you just keep going wandering and wandering and wandering, like in the television show, and you get to some point like, this is not going to go anywhere. You know that they've cut off every possible avenue they could make sense with. You're like, yeah, this is going to be a problem. Or
sometimes it feels like they've reached a point and then they have to one up it without any preparation.
Right. And that's the thing, that good writers who can really capture attention, they one up it. They keep that excitement going. They keep building it and building it. So they get to this threshold where you're never going to pay this off, so that the reader will be like, oh, that was absolutely what I was hoping for. It's never going to get there. But if you see where the ending is, if you know how it's going to end, you always keep that as the high ground, so you can always ramp up to the highest point, then it will work. But if you are contriving your way through it, what you're writing to make the reader interested is never going to be quite as good as where you logically have to now bring all the strings together, like, yeah, okay, that'll work, but it's really not great. So for me, it's a balance. You have to do a little bit of discovery and a little bit of outlining.
My characters have actually been locked in a room before, and I'm like, how am I going to get them out? So that actually made me laugh.
Lindsay, what about you?
Well, I'll have to say, I learned from MacGyver long ago that if you lock your guys in a room and they can't get out, you just go back and you add the 2 things you need to blow a hole in the wall, and they happen to be in the room when you got there. So, little tip for the pantsers out there. But I pantsed this first series. I think I'm like Michael and I, as long as I know the ending, I can find my way there. I'm now become an outliner just because it is a lot more efficient. I was the same way, where I'd have to like rewrite scenes or throw away chapters because I wasn't really that sure how things were going to get to that ending. And but that first series, I just knew how it ended. Like I knew book 7, it was supposed to be book 6. I knew what happened kind of at the end of the book, and everything else was leading up to it. And I was able to find my way there. And I can do both, but outlining is more efficient. So I've drifted that way these days.
Very cool. DW, what about you?
It's the same for me. I'm a pantser who evolved into an outliner, I guess you could say, because usually if I'm fleshing out a new idea, I will just sit down and start writing it, because you have to explain it to yourself, for a little while. But then I will sit down and I'll do like a pyramid or, a curve or something, because I have to know what the good guys are doing and what the bad guys are doing, at the right time, so that you hit a few points. But once you get down into it, into writing the scene, that's where you just allow for things to happen. At least that's the way I do it. I'll even give myself word count goals sometimes. I'm going to do this thing in 2,000 words or whatever. So I will constrict myself a lot. I found that I write better the more rules I put on myself, because it's almost like being locked in that room. You have to figure your way out. So if you say I've got to do this in 3,000 words or whatever, you really have to concentrate on what you're doing.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the fun part about starting. Starting with just kind of a pantsing idea. You go, you develop, you see what happens. And the really fun thing about staying in one world with it is you already have an established world to play in. So even though you're pantsing the beginning of it, as you get going, as you finish that first, second, third book, you get a trilogy maybe, you already have an established world. So if you could back up in history 100 years and you kind of know where things are going, but then you can really play with it because you can have things happen that no one knew about that all tie in. And I think that's, at least in my case, I really love an established world for that. But like you were saying, I love starting off with no idea and just kind of going with it, but then having to put some structure there to actually fix some of the issues.
Well, you know what? Actually, I guess I did lie. I'm not 100% Discovery. I do know the ending. I actually even know the middle. So it is like connecting the dots. What I do, though, daily, perhaps is as close to an outline, as I walk my dog 2 to 4 miles with my brother. And actually, the idea for my new series came from him telling me, you know, your book is weird, right? And I was like, yeah, I know it's weird. People have told me it's weird. I add, like, for example, I add comedy when comedy should not be in that scene. So I do strange things. He's like, I bet you couldn't get weirder. I was like, challenge accepted. So, but every day with that walk with my brother, we just go through the story. I'm like, oh, what do you think this will be cool? Do you think this will be cool? And then that's actually how so perhaps it's like creating my idea for that day. And so that's another way that I write.
Interesting.
Andy, what is our next question?
Well, Michael, you were going to say something, and you got.
I'm sorry, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to say that if anyone is just starting out writing, I think the best way to start out is discovery, because by doing discovery, you learn how a book is built, and that's about the only way you really can do it. You can't really outline if you don't know what a book is going to look like anyway. But if you discovery write through a few times, you'll say, oh, yeah, this was good up to here, and then this is where I lost it. What did I do wrong there? And then each time through it, of course, I'm of the opinion that it takes a few novels to actually learn how to write one. Some people think you write the first one and that's fine, but I've not found that to be the case. But the process of discovering your way through teaches you the method that you need to use it. And then when you get further along, then you know how a book is set up, and then you can outline it a lot easier. You know what elements you need, when, where, and it flows a lot better. Otherwise, if you try outlining and you're not real familiar with how to write a novel, you're going to have a bigger problem, because at that point you really will be contriving, because you have no idea how to make motivations equal results. That's something I think you have to pick up through experience.
Michael, can I ask Michael a question real quick, Andy?
No,
I can't ask. So I get a lot of people asking me. I'm an ENFP, and part of being an ENFP is motivating people. And more so than even motivating yourself. And I guess when I'm around people, they all want to start writing novels. And I've been telling people that you'll be surprised how good you are when you start writing. Do you believe that's true? Because for me, it was true. I'm happy with my writing. I'm not stagnant. Of course, I get better every day. But I always tell people, if you write it and you think it's bad, it's good. If you think it's good, it's awesome. If it's awesome, it's almost perfect. And that's because I go by how I feel when I'm writing that day. Would you say that most people will actually be able to produce something semi-decent their first time?
No.
Okay.
My actual opinion is interesting, because it's weird, because I talked to Brandon Sanderson and we hit on the same thing, which was surprising that we both did the same thing. We both thought when we first started writing that we were really good writers. We weren't. But if you don't think you're a really good writer, you'll stop.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
Naivety that you think you're better than what you are actually keeps you writing. And it's okay to have a little bit of arrogance that's unfounded, because without that, you're just going to get frustrated. Because if you're really knowledgeable about writing and you start writing and you can't match that ability, you're going to be so depressed, be depressed with everything you write. You'll just say, I can't be that good, so I'm no longer going to try. Well, it takes a while. But if you don't feel that you at least are pretty good at it, because people like developing talents for things that they're good at, right? So you need to have that sense of desire, and that comes from thinking you're good at it. So I read a lot of stuff by aspiring writers, which is why I answered the way I did, because most of it really is not very good. But that doesn't mean they can't get good, or they can't at least improve a great deal. A lot of it has to do with craft. Some people are really great with coming up with a really great idea. They're fantastic about coming up with this wonderful concept, but when they actually try to write it out, they have problems. There's other people who can take an absolutely crappy story, but just because they can really, describe it very well and get you interested as a reader, it's great. I mean, some people can write going to the store to get a glass of milk or a gallon of milk and make it just riveting. Other people have a fantastic story like Star Wars and just blow it. So learning how to do that, I think, takes a little while. I mean, I got published. Even after I got published, I have improved dramatically since the first book, and it's just something that takes, I think, a little practice.
Awesome answer. Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate you.
I have a question for you guys. We mentioned Brandon Sanderson, and so with his Way of Kings Stormlight Archive series, he was like, I've wanted to write this for so many years, but I didn't have the talent yet, or I didn't feel like it was ready. Do you guys have one of those sort of like Magnus opuses that you feel that you want to write one day when you're good enough?
No. I mean, I wrote 13 novels before I got my first book published. So, I mean, I explored a lot of things, and then I wrote Rhaenyra just because I was writing it mostly because I wanted to write something that was just plain fun. I didn't want to have to do a whole lot of detailed work on it. I'm just going to work it up off the top of my head, which is how I got that. But that wasn't a situation where I needed. I had this great thing in the back of my head. I keep coming up with more and more ideas, and I just keep. I mean, I hate people always come up to you and say, "You're a writer. I have a great idea. I want to know if you write it for me." Like, how how many ideas I have? I'll die before I get any of these done.
Interesting. What about you guys, Lindsay, JT, DW?
I would have actually said no a while ago, but it's interesting because I'm contemplating a new series that's going to be more hard science fiction, which is something I've kind of been daunted with in the past since I don't have a science background. And I've written space opera, but it's like all other space opera that you just kind of wave away. Oh, yeah, there were wormholes, and there's artificial gravity on the ships. It's cool.
It's powered by, someone said this the other day, powered by hand wavium.
Yes. Most of my sci-fi right now, I would say all of it is just fantasy and space. So I've been kind of waiting to try a sci-fi series that's a little more fact-based, set in our own solar system in the near future. And I also want to do a lot of point of view characters, which is something I've only done a couple times. I actually don't read a lot of epic fantasy because I tend to only care about one or two of the characters, and I end up skimming a lot. So it's going to be a challenge to me as an author to see if I can make something with a whole bunch of characters, everybody with their own story, keeping myself entertained and hopefully other people entertained. So I would say the combination of the two is something I didn't know I was waiting to write, but I think I was. So yes.
Interesting. DW, what about you?
Yeah, I've got something. It's airships and war, but not steampunk. And I like the idea of what Jeremy said earlier about advancing or retreating the history. That's the kind of the way I look at my world, is that I'm writing the history of a distant planet. So I've got something that's in the works, but I got voted on the next series. I put out a poll to my mailing list whether they wanted me to write that or urban fantasy, and they want urban fantasy, so it's getting put off for another couple of years. So I guess you could consider it a dream project in the works.
Interesting. Jeremy, what about you?
It's funny, DW put it out to his mailing list. That's kind of what happened to me with one series, my Stormborn books. I put up a poll going, hey, which one do y'all want? And they picked the one that I had less ideas for. So it's weird. So what Michael was saying really kind of home true with me is that I wrote 3 books that have never been published. I learned a lot. I'd like to eventually take those books and form them into something else, which I think would be fun at this point. And then Rogues of Magic, which is actually something I republished. It was an original trilogy, which I learned a lot. But I feel like with each series, I'm learning a bit more. If you take, for example, my Half-Elf Chronicles from book 1 to book 6, I hate book 1 in one form. Like I enjoy it, but I've learned so much that I could have improved on by book 6. I feel like my next series is gonna be better. I don't know if I really have a level that is the top per se for me. I think with each series as a writer, you develop. You learn how to do things a little bit better. And I think we've all been plagued with the my readers are gonna hate this. And then you give it to them and they're like, oh, we love it. I'm like, really? Okay, that's cool. I'll keep writing. And again, going with what Michael said, it's a little bit of arrogance to keep you writing. No, I'm a writer. I've already got these books out. I'm going to keep doing it. But then it goes back to the you're never done improving. So while between Half-Elf Chronicles, which is my bigger series that I just completed, I decided to return to a different time period where the story's kind of established. I can have fun with the characters, but I'm building up, I'm planning, I'm using the strategies I learned with earlier books to prepare for my next big series, as I call it, which will be my Shadow Elf books. In my opinion, that will be the one that is bigger and better. I guess you might call it my Magnus Opus, but I'm probably going to get done with those and want to write even bigger. I think you just keep moving up, especially now with indie publishing and the ability to, you're not waiting 6 months to a year for one book. Some of us put out a book a month. There's some that put out faster. So I'm going to try to keep improving, try to get up to your skill, Andy.
Good plan. You got a couple of years to go, Jeremy, but
I don't know. I'm so jealous because he only wrote 3 books before he got taken. Well, I remember I was at a convention with Daniel Polanski, who wrote Lowtown, and I was sitting next to him, and he'd just come out with it. And so I asked him, I said, "So how many books did you write?" And he said, "Oh, just this one." I said, "Well, yeah, I know this is your first published book." I said, "But how many did you write to get this one published?" And he goes, "Oh, no, just this book. This is the only book I've ever written." And I was ready to strangle the guy. Yeah,
There are a number of writers like that who just do great on their first try, and then there's the ones who just put in the hard work, who just nose to the grindstone until it works.
Are you insulting my nose?
No, not even a little bit. It's an excellent nose.
But see, those people that hit it out of the blocks with the first book, they then can't write a second book. Usually, they're like, especially if it was really successful, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what do I do now?" So I feel like it's actually better not to have that super easy success early on and to have to work for it, because you really learn a lot in the process, of course. So I don't regret that my first book didn't kill it. Actually, my first 2 or 3 also, I didn't even finish completely. So I think that it's still another path to success, and it's one that may actually be a little easier to maintain in the long run.
Very true. Stevie, what about you?
What was the question again? I was actually really meditating on what Lindsay and Michael were saying. That is no, really, what was the question?
I totally forgot.
Oh my God.
It wasn't a question. We were just chatting about, first books and how many books it takes you to get going.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually am really hard on my writing. Believe it or not, so when I'm writing, I'm very passionate about it. Andy knows I'm extremely passionate. I get really, really into every series that I've written. This is so this is my second series. I would say when I wrote the Dark Assassin series, that was like my life. I was dreaming in it. I was like, I'll never write anything better than this. And now I have this new idea, and I'm finishing book 2 today in this series. And I'm like, this is the best thing I've ever written. I wish I was able to write this 5 years from today, when I'm going to be a much better writer. So there is definitely validity to that. I'm not ignorant. I know that, my writing will never be as good as it will be tomorrow. So I want to say that every project I'm starting is my, what did we say? Magnus Opus? Magnum Opus, whatever. But yeah, that would be my answer to that. I try and put 100% of my passion into everything I write. And another thing I want to really work on is my imposter syndrome. I feel when people ask, like yesterday I was at a store, and for some reason I started talking to a stranger, which I usually do. And they asked me what I did. I said, well, I'm a fantasy author. I'm like, oh, what's the name of your book? I read fantasy all the time. I read Brandon Sanderson. I read Brent Weeks. I'm like, don't read my book. I honestly 100% did not want them to read my book because I don't want to be compared to that. And so I'll give them another book to read besides my book. And then when they insist, I'll give them my book. Luckily, I've actually had people email me back and say, hey, I really enjoyed your book. Why'd you put it down? And it's something I'm working on. But I think Michael's advice is so true. You just got to have a little bit of that arrogance and really believe that you're good to keep yourself moving forward as well. Oh, quick rant. The problem with Kindle and Amazon is that these indie authors are able to produce crap, make money with crap, and not move up. And that really bugs me, that they don't work on craft. They don't go back, read their sentences over, how could I have done this better? Or they don't read craft books, or they don't read from other authors, and they don't strive to be better. And I think people like us at this roundtable are the ones who are going to succeed more, because we are actually into the craft, and we're working on getting our, becoming better writers every day. So that's my tiny little rant about that.
Well done. Stevie's tangent for the episode.
I got to have a tangent in every episode.
All right, now, circling it back around to us. If you were an assassin, what of your personality traits would make you a successful assassin? Like, which of your personality traits do you think would go into your career as an assassin? Anyone?
Arrogant?
Sadistic.
Sadistic.
That's the easiest way for me to put it. My wife would actually agree with that statement. She actually hasn't read any of my stuff, because she'll start. I think she actually started Winemaker of the North. She's like, really? You're just going to go to this right away? I'm like, what? It's 3 sentences in. Got to kill somebody. But no, I would say be a little bit sadistic with a side of humor. Yeah, the humor part of it's also important. At least that's for me.
Interesting.
I'll actually vouch for JT. That is very true about his writing. But what's funny is your career outside of writing is complete opposite of being a sadist, right?
It is. Before I went full time as an author, I've been a paramedic for 9 years. I still am a paramedic. I'm just not working full time anymore. And so when I talk about squirting arteries, I've seen them. I've had my hand, on a broken skull, keeping a brain from falling out. So a little unique side of things. And then again, sadistic. I can talk about this and drink some coffee. It's not a big deal to me.
Michael's face is hilarious.
Maybe more than sadistic would be sort of lack of squeamishness. Like, because you've been around all of that for so long, it doesn't faze you as much as someone who's never been around it before.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a good way to put it, because to me, it's like someone would be like, oh my gosh, there's blood all over the ambulance floor. Me, it's like, that's going to be a big mess to clean up.
DW, what about you?
Probably just my stubbornness.
Stubbornness, okay.
Like, if I was an assassin, and I had a target, like, you would be dead eventually. Yeah, I would not stop. Probably.
Michael, what about you?
I think the fact that I am a super genius is probably going to do it.
I was going to say, yeah.
Being Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah.
You know how well he's done with the Roadrunner all these years,
Yeah.
It's not that he's missing all the time. He's just trying to make sure he has job security.
That's very true.
Super genius.
Well, I could not do it since I don't even like confrontation with like the clerk at the grocery store. But I'm definitely a schemer. So I think I like to think that if I was going to do anything evil or illegal, that I would come up with a creative way and like really think it through at how not to get caught if it's a world where the law is a concern. But that would be my thing. I would probably end up paying someone to do it, and I would come up with the scheme for them to do. Would be the only way I would have a shot of wanting to see blood all over the ambulance floor.
I want to know where the grocery clerk is.
Yeah, me too. Let's go kick his ass.
Where does she shop?
It's actually those people when I'm out hiking that complain that my dogs are off a leash that I would go for. Like, dogs have to run. Run away. Yeah. Go away. Mind
Lindsay
your own business.
Wants to be a guild master.
There you go.
Yeah.
Pay your 10% and I'll set up the appointments for you.
Exactly. Stevie, did you already go?
I haven't gone yet. Have you gone?
No, go ahead.
Okay. This is a very easy one for me, and I would say the ability to be charming. Ever since I could remember, I was always able to talk myself out of anything. Buttering up, evading questions, just being someone no one wanted to cross just because they liked me. So I never really had any huge bullies or anything like that. So the ability to talk, which I've always been really good with my words. I've always been the speaker. I took speech classes almost every semester through college. So yeah, charming, the ability to speak. Able to warm myself into those situations where I can stick that dagger in that throat.
Very good. I'm kind of torn between the two. I know that I would sort of bull rush in and just rush over everybody. I'm 6.5 feet tall, so that would kind of go towards being one of that kind of assassins. But I think I'd get pretty creative with it, because like when I'm writing my stories and I'm like getting creative with the methods that the assassins have to use to kill, or the thieves have to steal, or whatever it is, it's like, I could do this. I could make this happen. Yes, Lindsay, I agree. Ogres. I was always the half giant or half ogre in Dungeons and Dragons, because it gave me that barbarian rage, but then the thick skin. But that, go ahead.
Me? Oh, I was going to say, it's true. I was going to bring up you choosing Berserker for our D&D sessions.
It's my style, which kind of leads into the last question of the podcast. If you were an assassin, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh my God. Don't ask an author that. It's like every weapon is awesome.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you got to be specific about the setting too. You know what I mean?
Well,
Medieval
we're
world,
all fantasy, right?
Well, I can go with one.
Go ahead.
An icicle.
Right, because it would melt.
I actually used that in a book one time. That he stabbed a guy in the throat with an icicle and just melts away. So you lose fingerprints, you lose the murder weapon. No one knows what happened.
Interesting. That would be great. That would be great for a setting where forensics is a thing. Whereas in fantasy, like if you lived in a northern setting, like a frozen tundra.
To bring it up, it was a fantasy world, not a medieval style, but a contemporary fantasy situation. But the only thing that could hurt the person was cold. And the practical matter was, he lives in Death Valley. And I literally researched this by flying to Vegas as the main character would, and then renting a car and going into Death Valley in August. It was 124 degrees. So, but that's just a side note of the fun things you sometimes do for research. But yeah, that was an interesting way of actually solving that problem.
That is a pretty awesome weapon. Stevie, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say, now I have to read one of Michael's books, because that blew my mind. and the thing that makes me so mad is now I can't steal that idea, because that's so Michael now. It's like, now I want the ice cube thing, ice cube, ice cube, icicle.
You're going to bludgeon him to death now.
Yeah. For me, I know this is unfair, but I want to say, like, within each situation, if I'm going to assassinate somebody, a dagger. If I'm going to fight somebody with, let's say it's an assassination attempt that failed, I want a staff, because that's what I was really good at when I was doing martial arts. But I've always been a big fan of spears. And if I have a character in a book who's like my absolute favorite, he's the charming guy, he gets the girl, he always has a spear, because that's like my ultimate favorite weapon that it's so cool.
Very cool. Lindsay, what about you?
I don't know. There are a lot of cool things out there to choose from. I think I'm most impressed with the guys that can just do it with their bare hands, though. I did martial arts a little bit, but I was always a fan of all the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies and stuff growing up. And so I love whether or not the flying crescent kick to the back of the head is very realistic as far as what would work. I always enjoy that, and I love the Hollywood fights, even though they're not realistic. It's just so fun to watch this stuff. But my character, he's mostly unarmed combat specialist, but he does have a dagger. It's a black dagger. It's a big mysterious thing in the series. It actually ends up being like made from alien technology, so you get your dagger out of whatever, something better than graphene. So that's kind of just a fun signature piece, because it was all black. So I guess what I enjoy in reading is when there is sort of like a neat weapon, whether it's a sentient sword or, just Elric sword, something that's a little more memorable and that you tie with the character. Right. So that's what I enjoy as a reader.
A signature weapon, essentially.
Right.
Very cool. DW, what about you?
Well, as a writer, I'll say magic, because it's the most fun to write, because you can do anything you want, But if I was an assassin, I would have to go with a dagger and a garrote, probably, just a classic combination.
A dagger and what?
A garrote.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Jeremy?
Anything that the hunter would be scared to use. No, for me personally, if I'm just gonna, if I was just a normal assassin, I would say a dagger. But if for me as a person, if I was going to assassinate someone, I'd have to have reason and a lot of emotion behind it. And so that person probably did something to me or hurt someone I loved. So if they killed someone I liked, I would try to use the bone of someone I liked that they killed to bludgeon them. But that's
Oh my
sadistic.
That is
What the heck?
yeah.
Some serious shit right there. Jesus.
This is PG right here. This is a PG podcast. What the heck? No.
Interesting.
Well,
You
there's
know,
a reason my next series is about purely dark assassons. So
Sweet.
bone killers.
Bone
Ah,
killers.
that's the boners. You got a series title. You're welcome.
Oh my god.
you can use
what
that.
was,
Go ahead.
What was
Oh, better yet.
DW's weapon?
The boner killers.
I thought it was PG.
His was a dagger and one of those piano wire garrots.
Oh, nice. Real quick, before we end the podcast, I wanted to introduce or say an interesting fact. When growing up in Chinese martial arts, they had this whip, and that was the weapon no one wanted to mess with was the whip, because when you did forms, there were usually two people with whips, and there was a higher chance of getting popped with that damn whip. So actually, the whip was the most fearful weapon for people to have to go up against. And also there was a chance of getting hit with your own whip as well. So I've always been interested in that as well.
Have you ever seen that Saturday Night Live skit, The Whip Master, from a long time ago?
No, I'm gonna YouTube it though.
Yeah, you should YouTube it. It's funny. It's. I think it had Bill Murray in it. I can't remember. It's been a long time. But the guy comes into a bar and he, it's like the Whip Master, and he whips this girl from across the bar to drag her over, and it wraps around her neck.
Wait, Lindsay, you got to tell this story.
I was just going to say, I actually got a bullwhip once because I had a character that was kind of Indiana Jones-ish. And my dad comes in and he's like, oh, that's so cool, a bullwhip. My brother and I used to always play with it. And he explained he's got this scar on his chin that he's had his whole life. He's like 76 now. And he's like, yep, you can whip yourself. That's how I did it. So be careful if you're going to teach yourself a bullwhip. They come back.
That's awesome.
That is funny. If I was an assassin, again, I feel like my weapon of choice would be like one of those, those massive axes. And so, you just charge in and just chop the shit out of people. And, so I'd be probably one of those assassins that, would have to let me and then charge in, bull rush, kill, and then run off. Sort of like a Logan Nine Fingers meets Conan the Barbarian style assassin.
Jeez, you and JT, I swear. Uh-oh, where'd Andy go? All right, well,
the show is over. That's how it ends.
Well, you know what? I just realized this is a Fantasy Fiends podcast, so I had no idea really. So I'll go ahead and take over real quick. While I know we're gonna want Andy back. I don't even know if he can get back. I'm gonna pull up my So, oh my God. Poor Andy. Did anyone ever use psychological warfare in their books when it came to their assassins?
I do a little bit.
A little bit. Oh.
It depends, I mean, not necessarily the character who is the assassin, but it's an element.
An element. Okay, yeah.
And not usually as a weapon.
That is your weapon then, the psychological warfare.
No, I'm saying that I didn't use it as an actual weapon, but certainly as a fun torturing device.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I think they call it nowadays word judo, speech judo. What do they say? Speaking judo. Dang it. Let's see if I need to get Andy back. So I guess we should all go around and, say what our books are for readers and viewers, starting with, how about you, DW?
My series is called The Seven Signs. It starts with Child of the Flames. And you can also get the free novella in the Defiant Guardians box set that we did. That is the prequel novella to that series.
That was a fun series. That was, and what was your assassin's name?
Well, I have a couple, but the main one is probably Degen.
So you have a couple assassins in your one series?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, JT, it's up to you. I know it's Saviska. Saviska. I was actually pronouncing it correctly when I was reading it on Facebook.
Okay.
Did we read from your story on our podcast episode?
Not from that one. We read from Half Elf Chronicles because we did the gladiator scene.
Okay, yeah, that was freaking gory.
Yeah, so Readers who do know me know I've attempted to write young adult. It failed miserably. Never works out. Mainly because of the graphicness I put into it.
It might be all the bone knives. You know?
It might be. It very well might be. As far as for like assassin characters, Saviska's in Rogues of Magic at this time. I am gonna write another series after that. I've got another series I got to do before that to kind of set everything up in the world. But I've got multiple assassins, including a Vern, who's actually, I don't know if I call him retired, but he doesn't assassinate anymore. He actually got very involved in earth magic to kind of offset his assassin times. And he's probably one of my favorite characters. I do, if you go on either my Facebook page or my website, I do have mailing list sign up, kind of like a free little starter story that people can grab. Yeah, I do write a little bit darker. Some of my stuff gets, like Half-Elf Chronicles is a very, very dark story. I start off, I mean, it's not really a spoiler in my opinion, but I start off killing off several main characters. That's the book one. We hit that pretty hard. And as the series progresses, you keep moving. I keep moving the goalpost basically. Every time you think something good's going to happen, boom, something bad. But it's a series, so it's designed to be read book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But yeah.
Nice. And what about you, Lindsay?
My series is The Emperor's Edge. The first book is free and just got some new covers, so you can check them out. It's like I said, it was the first series I did. It hasn't sold the most out of anything I've done because there's no dragons, and everybody knows dragons sell better than just assassins. So you should have dragons and assassins in your book if you want the best chance. But anyway, it's the one, like I said, that has had the most fan art, and so many people still ask, are you going to write more? Are you going to write more? Maybe someday, but the series is complete, so you can check it out. Just try that first book if you want, and if it's not your cup of tea, that's fine. But if you are, there's like 6 more.
Hey, Lindsay, have you
It's
ever
an Eastern.
assassin dragon?
I'm sorry.
Lindsay considered assassin dragons?
That's going to be one of my next series. That's going to be a sure New York Times bestseller.
Kill your opponent. That would be something.
That would be rough to go up against. Most of my dragons are kind of chill. They just want to like eat cheese and hang out. So they're not as scary as they could be.
Sounds like me. Michael, the Icicle Killer. What's up?
I have presently 3 series in stores. I've got Raya Revelations, Raya Chronicles, and Legends of the First Empire, which is the next book's coming out this, I think is next July.
Awesome. Congratulations.
2 6-book series and 1 presently 4-book chronicles, which are kind of standalone, so they'll just keep kind of going as I write them. I mean, you don't have to. I mean, it's not like you have to wait for the next one, so it's not
We'll have to get you on the podcast for that one. Andy, can you talk now?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
Some technical difficulties. My series is the Hero of Darkness series, half demon assassin with a bloodthirsty dagger that drives him to kill. Fun. No, he's not an assassin dragon like Lindsay's writing, but he's still pretty cool. You can check me out. I'm on everywhere as Andy Peliquin, Facebook, Amazon, website, etc.
And my name is Stevie Collier. I write the Dark Assassin series. The first book is The Four Territories. My assassin's name is Esh. He is infected, I guess you could say infected, with a terrible evil parasite that just wants to kill. He has purple hair, and he's a freak of nature, and he's really, really bad with women. So if you want to read, I would read the book just for that because it's hilarious. It was it was me in high school. All right, so Andy, should I go ahead and
Sign off?
Sign off. All right. We want to thank all the awesome authors here today who are subconsciously wanting to kill people for money. We're all sick-minded people, and well, I guess I should just speak for myself. And JT, the sadist. Guys, readers, viewers, we love you all. Check out all these awesome authors. We hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you again on the Fantasy Fiends Podcast.
Goodbye.